A friend of mine recently approached me about building him a console table with a resin river. So I had this maple slab that had seen better days, but I thought it might be good for this project. So I started by cutting it up and just seeing how much wood was still, hard and able to work with. Definitely wanted to use these great live edge pieces for the resin river, and then just cutting up the rest for some lumber. After cutting it up, I started milling it down, trying to get some straight edges, and I decided to resaw the two live edge pieces due to the fact that they were thick enough that I could get both sides of the river out of them. Due to the fact that the resin rivers on this table were going to be a little bit wider than what I did usually, I decided to install some steel bar to reinforce it. So I routed a 1/4-inch channel and then epoxied the bar in with a little bit of silica filler, and it worked pretty well. So I use Pro Marine Supplies epoxy. I've had a lot of luck with their product. And I use black diamond pigment to get the color here. Now, the Pro Marine Supplies is not a deep set epoxy. You got to kind of build up the layers, but as long as you're patient and you have the time, works pretty well. For this table, I was going for kind of the aquamarine, blue-green kind of ocean feel, and I feel like it looked great with the light-colored maple wood. So make sure in between each of the layers to scuff up the epoxy. Make sure to get a good bond with the next layer. You don't want anything to come apart in the end. Then came the sanding, and oh man, was there a lot of sanding to try to get this resin knocked back down to being level with the wood. In the end, I took it to a buddy of mine who has a shop with an industrial-sized belt sander, and he took care of it for me. I was fortunate enough to have these other smaller slabs that came from the same tree as the larger, so I used these to cut up some leg blanks. This maple was so hard to work with, it was the hardest wood I've ever dealt with. But in the long run, we did come out with some decent leg blanks. I think they turned out to be like maybe 1.5 inches, 1 3/4 square in the end. Onward to cutting up the rest of the maple to get the aprons. And shout out to my kids for helping out in this process. Having the extra hands made this a lot easier, as this maple was heavy and pretty challenging to work with. So I milled the 2 boards down, got them down to final width and thickness. And then here I'm ripping off about 1 inch from the top and the bottom of the front apron, so that I can remove what's going to turn out to be the drawer fronts. So I measure here for the drawer fronts, and I'm going to go back over to the table saw and remove those, and that way when the drawers are all installed, we're going to have nice continuous grain across the entire front apron, which looks pretty cool. So here I'm separating the drawer fronts from that front apron we just saw. And then I'm going to put it all back together. I use pocket hole screws and some wood glue to get things back together. And as long as you're careful, you can barely see the seams in the final piece. Now I start cutting everything down to what is going to be the final dimensions. I think I ended up with about 54 inches wide for the front and back apron and about like 10 inches deep for the side aprons. I decided to add some tapers to the inside faces of all the legs just to make them a little bit more interesting line, and worked out pretty good. Onward to assembly. So I used pocket holes and pocket hole screws again, along with some wood glue. And if you notice those little boards underneath, I put about 1/8 of an inch reveal on the front of each of the aprons. And here we are, I'm pretty much assembled, and it's starting to look like a table. So for the drawer runners and the drawer sides, I built those out of poplar. Here I am measuring up what's going to be the drawer sides and cutting those out over on the table saw. So then went to the router table to route out about a 1/2 inch rabbet on both the drawer fronts and backs to accept the sides. I used a 1/4 inch birch plywood for what would be the drawer bottoms. And then with a little bit of glue and some clamping, we got a couple of drawers. To install the drawer runners, I basically placed these in here, put the drawers in, kind of wiggled things around to try to get the right fit so that the drawer would slide in nice and easy. Then it was time to trim up the top and the bottom shelf of the table and get those installed. For the bottom shelf, I had to use a jigsaw to notch out each one of the corners to fit with the legs. And to all the edges of both the top and bottom shelf, I routed a 1/2 inch round over to make everything nice and smooth. And then installed them with some pocket holes. Onward to one final sanding before I finish the table. And then I apply the finish. So I use a Minwax polyurethane to finish a lot of my projects. And the finish is always the most exciting part because you can see that wood come to life and you see that resin pop. And for a slab that was destined for the burn pile, this wood is pretty nice looking. Now on to one final step, install the drawer pulls. So I saw this trick on another YouTube video where they use the tape as a template. So you mark your holes and that shows you where to drill. So it worked out really nice. And here we have the finished table. Really pleased with how this table came out. The wood is beautiful, the curl, the figure is just awesome, and I think the resin really goes well with it. Now, like I said earlier in the video, this table was for a friend of mine. His name Russell Gulick. He is an artist in Melbourne, Florida. So we came up with a deal where I traded the table for a couple of his paintings. I put a link to in the description to his website. Please check him out. This was Lock's Life, guys. Thanks for watching.